when you go through nursing school, you're taught, right? You're an advocate for the patient. Like as a nurse, your number one thing is to advocate for the patient. And I always was like, who's advocating for the nurses? Like it was always in the back of my mind, even from the very beginning of my nursing career. I thought, who's doing that? And so I
Mhm.
always felt like somebody needed to be advocating for the nurses. And I feel like that's been a better role for me throughout my career to kind of develop that and see where that went.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today, I'm excited to welcome Rachel Malloy, a seasoned nurse with over 20 years of experience who has transitioned beyond the bedside. Rachel began her career in neurocritical care, which laid the foundation for her current role as a clinical application manager in the medical device industry. She also holds a Doctorate of Nursing Practice from Wake Forest, where she teaches media engagement to D&P scholars. Rachel is a published author, speaker, and strong advocate for nurses in the media. In this episode, she shares her journey, the power of saying yes to new opportunities, and why media skills are essential for nurses. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm so thrilled to be here, honestly.
Yeah, and here we are speaking on a media platform, and I know that today we are going to talk a lot about nurses, using their voice and being heard through the media. So I'm really excited to dive into that. But first, I'll let you kind of dive in where you think it makes sense, but I'd love for us to for you to give us some background on your career so that we have, an idea of your perspective that you're bringing into this conversation.
Yeah, sure. No problem. I became a nurse as an adult. So I was, 30 when I graduated from nursing school. And it was in the 1990s. So it's been a long time that I've been a nurse. And I was fortunate to get hired right into a 32-bed general ICU. We took everything. This is back before we had specialized ICUs. And so I really got an opportunity to learn a lot in that role about different types of patients. But I gravitated towards the neuro population where everybody else was like, I don't really want to do those frequent neuro exams. I'm like, yeah, I don't mind that. I don't want the sweaty patient over there that's clutching their chest. So that's how I kind of fell into neuro. And my whole clinical career has been mostly in neurocritical care, neurodiagnostics, and stroke, TBI. Mhm.
Yeah, that is such a strong foundation. I mean, that's a very niche patient population, but very critical and really important to hone in on those skills. And those skills that you learned, they continue to serve you through your first career pivot. So tell us some about how you even started considering kind of your next role and what was next for you.
Yeah, sure. So I went back to school and I got my master's degree, and I got my master's in nursing with an education focus. So my intent was that I wanted to work in academics. I wanted to teach, and I did for a short amount of time while I still worked clinically at the hospital. I wanted to use my degree with this education focus, but I decided that academics probably wasn't the right place for me at that time. So I wanted to get my first certification, which is the CNRN, a Certified Neuroscience Registered Nurse. It's a pretty specific certification. There's less than 4,000 certified neuroscience registered nurses in the United States today.
Wow.
But I didn't want to do it alone. So I went around to all my neuro friends and said, "Hey, you guys want to do this certification with me?" And so I created a curriculum. We met once a month. We're like, okay, we're going to do spine this month, we're going to do pediatrics this month. I got people that would come in and talk about the specialties, and there were 10 or 12 of us, and we all took it. We all passed. It was a fantastic thing at the hospital. And in that process, I went to a CNRN review course, and I met a lady named Linda Littlejohn, who is kind of the mother of neuroscience nursing. And if you're a neuroscience nurse, you probably heard about Linda Littlejohn at some point because she does these fantastic educations on anatomy. And she worked for a medical device company and was looking for someone with a CNRN and an education focused degree. So she tapped me and said, "Hey, would you like to come work for me?" And I actually didn't go. I actually didn't think it was the right time for me to go.
Oh,
But
wow.
fast forward a year later, I run into her again and she said, "I have another position available. Are you ready yet?" And so that time I thought, well, Linda Littlejohns doesn't actually tap you on the shoulder twice. So I made that transition to industry. And it was a big decision. I had to talk to my husband. It was a travel job. I mean, I've been a road warrior for 13 years. So it was a big decision to make that transition, but it's been a fantastic pivot for me. And I just want to say, because I think oftentimes nurses feel if they move outside of the hospital setting or they move away from the bedside that they're not really a nurse anymore. And
Mhm.
I felt that. I'll be honest with you. I stayed PRN at my hospital for a long time, working, weekends and holidays just so that I could say that I remained clinical. But I actually don't see it that way at all anymore. I still consider myself to be a clinical nurse, even though I don't touch patients. I touch the people that touch the patient by providing them education and tools and skills in my role in industry. So that's kind of how I pivoted there. And at first, I provided just didactic education all over the United States. I literally have been in hospitals in every corner of the United States, right? From Alaska to San Diego to Maine to Miami. I've been there in all these level one and level two trauma centers providing education. And then just, time went into management. And now that management role has expanded beyond neurocritical care to all application specialists at the company that I work for, which is Natus Neuro. So I can give them a little plug.
And I want to go back to that, feeling that you had of leaving the bedside and feeling like, well, am I even a nurse anymore? Can I say I'm a clinical nurse? Because I think that is a struggle that nurses kind of deal with when they think about leaving their bedside role. I think that nursing is a profession where we connect our identity to our profession a lot. And so when we leave that hospital setting, it can sometimes feel like a shift of identity almost to figure out like, what does this even mean for me? Like, am I still a caregiver? Am I still a nurse? How does this new role fit into that? So, it's awesome that you were able to land at this point of like, yeah, I still am a nurse. I'm still making an impact clinically because it's that wanting to make an impact is something that we hear again and again and again, like on this show and like from nurses who are thinking about leaving the bedside. We want to make an impact. We're passionate about our work. So it's amazing that you were able to find that. And I know that the first role was in neurocritical care. Tell us a little bit more about like the devices that you were educating on and what exactly was involved in that role, because I think that industry roles can feel very foreign to us as nurses if we've never worked outside of like the hands-on patient setting.
Yeah, sure. So, very specific to neurocritical care, right? So, intracranial pressure monitoring devices, EVDs, external ventricular drains, where the CSF drains out of the brain. These are, you have to have some comfort level around that. But if you're a neurocritical care nurse, you would have that comfort level. Brain tissue oxygen monitoring, I educated on that device for a while. So, that's understanding the regional oxygen that's available in specific areas of the brain, depending on where that catheter is. And then the things that you need to place those devices. And, you could be a really good critical care nurse and just not know all the details and the nuances of these neurocritical care devices or even the research and the evidence behind that. So I think that's where someone in industry can really step up. Like, I feel really strongly that I know this space. Like, this is my space. I know it. I can talk about it. I can talk about the literature that supports it or the questions that are still unanswered around it. And so you get really specialized just in a different way, but I'm still a nurse doing it, right? And now I have been able to really expand that role to provide education, like online distance learning education. The company I work for is incredible when it comes to that. They have a whole neuro training academy where nurses could go and get education on cerebral dynamics or TBI care from a nursing perspective, and they even offer CEU. So I was able to work with my clinical team to develop all of that training and education. And you're not going to do that in a hospital setting unless you're the educator, and they're spread so thin.
Hmm.
So it's just it's just a different way of supporting nurses. And I know when I went through nursing school, I'm sure all nurses go through this. When you go through nursing school, you're taught, right? You're an advocate for the patient. Like, as a nurse, your number one thing is to advocate for the patient. And I always was like, who's advocating for the nurses? You know, like it was always in the back of my mind, even from the very beginning of my nursing career. I thought, who's doing that? And so I
Hmm.
always felt like somebody needed to be advocating for the nurses. And I feel like that's been a better role for me throughout my career to kind of develop that and see where that went.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cool that you're able to, kind of give back to the bedside nurses a little bit through that educational material to like prepare them better for the care that they need to provide. And I think that your clinical expertise is really important in the medical device world. And we'll talk more about like nurses using their voice like in the media, but I am such a strong advocate for nurses having a voice in all kinds of different areas of healthcare, whether that is, medical device or, a new software solution. I think that, the perspective that nurses bring to the table from that experience that they have at the bedside is so unique and so necessary if we're going to create devices and solutions that really work in healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. We understand the pathway, right? So oftentimes I'm in a situation where I'm explaining what that care path looks like for the patient. I even go to the manufacturing plant where our devices are made in San Diego, and I teach the people on the front line, the ones that are actually making the device, what it's like for that patient who's having the worst day of their life. They've had a bad trauma, they've got a severe brain injury, it's a life and death situation. And to teach them what that pathway looks like coming through the ER, why it's important for the doctors to be able to reach for a product that works the first time when you place it or when they, introduce that to the patient, and then what that means to be able to care for that patient throughout the continuum. So nurses play a critical role in that. There's no one else in the company, in a medical device company, that really has that unless you've got a medical director or a physician on board, like maybe a chief medical officer who's cared for that type of patient. So they're very dependent on that clinical perspective to understand, are we creating something that the end user is going to be able to utilize and have it benefit them? And I think one of the things we see sometimes in the medical device industry is we make things too complicated, right? It's all about like leapfrogging. How do we leapfrog to the next best thing, right? When really what we need is a device that works every single time that you reach for and that's easy for the end user to use. And so that's a perspective that the clinical team can bring to a medical device. So I think nurses are imperative to have in that perspective.
I totally agree. So, you've had a lot of focus in your career on education. And so, tell us about how you ended up making the decision to go back for your doctorate of nursing practice and where you've gone or what you've done with that degree.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not good at sitting still. I've always been a little bit like internally restless. It's kind of like, okay, so I got that done. What's the next goal? Like, what's the next thing that I want to do? It's just kind of who I am. And I have always been involved in professional nursing associations. I think if I was going to talk to a brand new nurse, I would say, find an association and get involved with them because I think that's really beneficial. And through that, it gave me a lot of opportunities, speaking opportunities, writing opportunities, committees, things like that. And what I found was that I was missing a skill set. I really felt like I needed to go back to school and get my doctorate because there was a skill set that I was missing. I wanted to be a better writer. I wanted to have a more critical eye of assessing manuscripts that are written. I wanted to really understand how we come up with evidence-based practice out of that research that's done. And through that process of going back to school, what I found myself doing is not pivoting away from being a neuro nurse, right? Because that's my thing. Like that's what I know, and recognizing those diagnostic processes and assessing those patients. But what I found is that I'm not just a neuro nurse; I'm a nurse, right? So, and as a nurse, I feel like I have a responsibility to play some leadership roles in all of that. So it gave me a much more global perspective of where nurses are in healthcare, where we need to go, how we can impact care, how we can really best advocate for our patients. And for me, I found my way to media training through all of that.
Yeah, and so I think that that's really interesting. Can you describe for us what exactly you mean by media? Because I think that is a very broad term with lots of different applications. So just define that for us a little bit.
It does. It does. And honestly, it has a little bit of a some people hear media and it has a negative connotation, right? You automatically think like fake news, or you think, media is just going to tell you what they want you, or they sensationalize things, right? So it has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. So I'd like to maybe diminish that a little bit when I talk about media. But media can come in all kinds of forms. It can be broadcast media, right? So, like the big things like your news station, your radio, stuff like that. It can also be a letter to an editor in your newspaper. It could be a journal article in your local community. If you've got like a community magazine, where I live on Merritt Island, Florida. So we have a little community magazine called Merritt Island Now. They have little health stories in there all the time. It can be podcasting, it can be blogging, it can be the use of social media, which is, very familiar, right? People are texting and getting on social media pretty frequently. So there's lots of different ways to use media, and not every form works for everybody. Some people are really comfortable, walking into a news studio, or they find a way to become comfortable walking in a news studio and doing, a segment, where other people are like, I just want to have a little blog and talk about what healthcare means to me as a nurse, or how I might be able to educate the public better on healthcare stories. So it could be all different kinds of things.
Yeah, that's helpful. And how did you land on media? Like, was there a certain experience or something that you did in school that landed you there? You went in for writing and research and came out very, very focused on media. So what was it exactly that landed you on that?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of different things. First, part of our curriculum was a class called Healthcare Policy, Advocacy, and Ethics. And in that course, we learned about the Woodhull study. And in 1997, the Woodhull study was published, and it showed that nurses were only sourced in the media 4% of the time, out of all healthcare news stories. And they gave 6 recommendations on what you could do to improve that so that nurses were more visible, because out of that Woodhull study, nurses were deemed healthcare's invisible partner. Sit on that for just a minute. Like, I just can't even acknowledge it. Like, we are not invisible. We are integral to the healthcare system, right? People
Hmm.
depend on us to care for patients, and the public trusts us to care for them, right? It's the most trusted profession. So I read all of that research that was going on, and the Woodhull study was revisited 20 years later after those 6 recommendations of how to make nurses more visible. And we weren't any more visible. We were only visible in 2% of healthcare stories. So I'm like, this is an ongoing issue, right? if nurses want to be addressed, if they want to address some of the issues that we're up against, then we need to have more presence. And when I first heard, nurses are invisible, I thought, no, we're not, right? Like I see nurses every day. Like if I get on LinkedIn, I got all kinds of nurse stuff that pops up because I choose that. That's my algorithm, right? But if you're the general public and you don't have any relationship to anybody, a nurse, then we probably are kind of invisible, right? Like who's thinking about the nurses? So I wanted to make that different. And because I was a non-traditional DNP student, not working in a clinical setting, it limited what my opportunities were for a DNP project. And so this was perfect program development, create a program development project around media training. And if you look and if you really start paying attention, lots of people are talking about how nurses need to get media training, but they don't tell anybody where to go to get it. so
Mhm.
so that's the gap. And that's what I'm here to try to make a difference. And it's encouraging nurses to normalize the concept of using media, but then it's also getting a professional nursing associations and academia, healthcare organizations to provide training to their nurses so that they can have a public presence because nurses teach patients every single day, right? We teach them
Mhm.
something every single day. Why don't we do that to the masses?
That's very true. Do you think that the fact that we are so limited by what we can talk about as it pertains to like patients and what we experience working with patients, we're very limited by what we can say publicly, obviously because of HIPAA. Do you feel like the fact that we are so used to that, like, kind of hush hush rule, do you think that contributes to nurses not speaking up in other ways on broader topics?
I think that's part of it for sure. And I should probably have a disclosure here and just, put it out there that if you are going to do anything in the media, just always check with your hospital. Make sure you know what their policy is. Make sure that you're not crossing any lines. And also, I honestly believe that nurses need to be having those conversations with their public relation departments in the hospital so that the public relation department can start thinking about, wow, you're right. Maybe we have been not using our nurses like we should be. We should train a group of nurses about how to speak to the media and utilize them. That's a great thing to do. They're the most trusted profession. Why aren't we doing that? So yes, I do think that's part of it, but I also think that's part of the thing that we need to talk about. We need to just start having those open conversations around it.
Totally. How do you think the public perception of healthcare and of nurses changes when nurses become more vocal in the media?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, we were heroes in
Mhm.
2020. Remember that? And, we still, it's been 23 years now. We've been the most trusted profession, right? Which is fantastic. Although, if you turn into a health news story, what you're probably going to see is a hospital administrator, a someone in legislature, or a doctor talking about healthcare stuff, right? And more recently, we've seen a lot of negative things about nurses in the media, right? So we've seen nurses be charged, right, for misappropriation of medications, or there was a nurse, and I actually even had a friend say, "Oh, what a shame, what a shame that that happened. That really put a mark on nursing." I'm thinking that was one nurse. There's 4 million of us. Uh,
Right.
like, if there were more of us doing positive things in the media, I think some of those negative things would be missing. And we tend to be really good, I think, as nurses to talk to each other, but we're really not
Mhm.
good at talking to the public. And the things that we can educate the public on are basic stuff that they need to know. For instance, traumatic brain injury, right? The number one cause of traumatic brain injury is falls. The most highest age group for falls are people over the age of 75. What can they do to reduce falls? Make sure that they don't have area rugs. Make sure that their paths and their houses are, clear for them to walk through. These are simple, simple things that the general public needs to know. There are a lot of people that are taking care of their elderly family members that do not want to lose their house or they don't want to leave their house. They want to stay living in their home and they want to know like how do I help my family member? Well, that's one thing. And if we could just start using the media to get some of these basic education things out, I think it would raise the level of awareness to nursing and I think it will also improve the health of our population.
Absolutely. And so, tell us about what you're doing now to educate nursing students on how they engage with the media and advocate away from the bedside.
Yeah, sure. So that same class where I was introduced to the Woodhull study, I'm now teaching a 4-week advocacy course on nurses in the media at Wake Forest with their DNP students, both with the postmasters and also the nurse anesthesia group also. So, but all at the doctoral level. And they read the literature, they learn about the Woodhull study and the studies that have happened since then. They go through my training program, which is online. They do some interviewing. They create a public service announcement, like a 30-second public service announcement, including a soundbite, and I provide feedback to them. And it's been really well received. And so we collected some data. It's not published yet. Maybe it will be by the time this podcast is aired. I'm not sure. But we collected some data. And what we found is that the students actually felt like their skill set improved and they felt more confident being able to do media engagement moving forward. So that's where I am with that. And I would be thrilled to talk to anybody who's interested in bringing that into their academic arena or to their professional nursing association.
Yeah, hopefully we get more of that. What are some of the skills that you teach and you think that are most needed and maybe lacking in nurses currently?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I like to think when you think of the word media, I want you to think communication because it really is about creating a very clear and concise message. So one of the things we teach is the how to think about like what does the audience want to hear? What message do you want to put across? And how do you get that media outlet specifically if you're doing something like with a radio or a television station, like what's their perspective on the topic, and then figure out what those are, and then come up with 3 concise messages and then stick to that message. And if you do that, I think that that's a part of communication skills that nurses are really good at being therapeutic, but maybe not as good at being very concise and getting their message across just in a 30-second clip, and then finding it to be memorable at the end. So creating a sound bite, something catchy, something that stays with you, that will stay with that person after they've heard the segment.
That's great advice. That's very tactical. That's a good takeaway. You did a great job there of delivering a concise and powerful and memorable message
Oh.
to that question. So I see it in practice. And so, if we can make communicating in the media an essential tool for all nurses, what do you think that does for the nursing profession? I mean, I know that you mentioned like we can make an impact on population health just by sharing our knowledge, but what about for the nursing profession? I get a sense that it would make us add to our authority when we speak if we establish ourselves as kind of like experts on these topics. But yeah, why should nurses care about learning these media skills?
Well, I think there's room for improvement in healthcare. And nurses are the largest group of healthcare workers, but we seldom get to sit at the table where those healthcare decisions are made. And until we are visible, until we are considered to bring that value, then we're not going to be invited. We're not going to be able to impose ourselves in there and then have our position heard. And we're getting there slowly, right? Like I became a nurse in the 1990s. We were not doing interdisciplinary rounding in the 1990s. So, just the fact that they do that now in a unit is incredible. So, nurses are starting to find their way in a clinical setting. And I think we just need to put ourselves out there more publicly too. And I'll tell you, it shouldn't be every individual nurse's responsibility to do this. Professional nursing associations have a responsibility to help their nurses learn to be media competent. Journalists want to hear from nursing associations because they find messages from them more credible than a single nurse, right? Nurses are the most trusted profession. Associations are considered credible. So, if those nursing associations would engage with media training for, there's lots of ways to do it, could be all of their members, could be core group of their members, then they can position their nurses as experts, right? And that attribute will come back to the association. But then we're able to get the message out about nurses more at a larger scale, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
just going to elevate the level of nurses in the community's eye, in the public eye, in the journalist's eye. It's going to be good. It's going to
I com-
happen.
I
It's going to
completely
happen.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly believe it's going to happen because media's not going anywhere, right? It's here to stay. So, and nurses are not going anywhere, and nurses are kind of fed up about stuff, right? So, it's going to happen.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that it'll be such a positive change for the nursing profession and like you mentioned, just for the health of the public, for nurses to have more of a voice and be heard. And you mentioned a little bit there about like, taking on something uncomfortable. Like, it can be uncomfortable to step into the spotlight, especially if you're like not used to that. And of course, like media training would be super crucial in making you feel confident and prepared to like take that stage. But I think that being brave and stepping into unfamiliar roles is really important, whether it's a nurse who is looking to pivot into like industry like you did or use their voice on the media. You've done this throughout your career. You've kind of stepped into these roles. And so maybe share a little bit of a message about just how that experience of saying yes and trying something uncomfortable and like having that growth mindset of learning as you go can be impactful in your career trajectory.
Oh, 100%. And listen, nurses are incredibly brave, right? So we're the people that run towards the trauma. We're the person that runs towards the person who's gushing blood to stop the bleed. So we're already brave from that perspective. And if you think about it, everything that we learned in nursing school was foreign to us. If you didn't grow up in a family where you constantly were exposed to medical stuff or was a patient yourself, it was new. Like, just remember the first time you had to start an IV. Like, you knew how to do it, but the first time you're like, oh boy, hope I don't hurt them. I hope I get the vein. Like, you kind of had to be brave to do that. And I think that bravery can be transitioned into something else. But nurses make fantastic leaders. They just do. It's who we are. We are thoughtful. We can take complex concepts and break them down into something that's easy to understand. We know how to be sensitive to people, whatever emotional situation that they may be going through. We're just really good at leading specifically from the heart. And I think that if nurses get their bravery on and just try new things, that it's the sky's the limit. You can really do anything that you want to do. There's no stopping you as a nurse. There's all kinds of opportunities out there. And one of the things I see, especially with younger nurses starting families and things like that, you're in that time of your life where, you're a nurse, but, maybe you're newly married or you have young children. And maybe that's not the time for you. And that's okay. Just don't ever forget that you got a lot that you can accomplish and just be brave and say yes to every opportunity that comes your way as long as you feel like it speaks to you. Like, don't do it if it doesn't speak to you, but if it speaks to you, then jump in there and do it. And that's how you get opportunities. That's how you grow. That's how professional development happens. That's how doors open.
Absolutely. And if there's a nurse listening today who thinks that this sounds really interesting and thinks, I think I have a message that I could deliver to the public through the media, but maybe they're not a DMP and maybe they don't have the access to like the course that you're giving through the media. What are some steps that nurses can start taking to allow their voice to start being heard?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so the first thing I would say would be try to engage with people that are doing it already, like pay attention to what they're doing and try to educate yourself on it. You can always contact me because I'm happy to talk to anybody. My website is nursesinthemedia.com. So you can reach out to me through there and I'm happy to have a conversation with you. If you're a nursing association or a member of a board of directors or involved in your nursing association, whether it's at a national level or even at a chapter or state level, I would love to hear from you and see how we can collaborate to help get your nurses started. I would also say they could, if you're a nurse and you're not sure where to start talking to other people and see what their thoughts are about it.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that being part of a nursing organization is a great first step. There's a lot of nurses who aren't, or maybe they were at some point and kind of fell off of the bandwagon. So, yeah, I think that joining a professional organization that aligns with you and your specialty or your passion, and then even just advocating from within with that organization on getting this type of education to that org's nurses, I think would be really powerful.
Even your state nurses
Yeah,
association. If you don't know what your specialty is yet, get involved with your state nursing association.
that's true. Can't forget about the state organizations. There's one in every state, so
Every state.
everyone has access to that. Amazing. Well, Rachel, thanks so much for coming on and sharing this important message today. I think that we have hopefully sparked some interest from nurses out there on getting their voices out there and being heard and trying new things and seeing what doors open for them. So, thank you again for coming on and speaking with us.
Thank you, Audrey, for giving me a platform to talk about normalizing nurses in the media because I truly believe that it will be impactful and it's going to happen. So, might as well get started.
If you'd like to connect with Rachel after today's show, you can find her on LinkedIn, visit her website at nursesinthemedia.com, or reach out to her by email at nursemalloy@nursesinthemedia.com. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.